It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Millions of youngsters loathe the very word maths. Our academic Prime Minister has decided everyone must do it until the age of 18. We'll discuss whether this is a good idea. We'll also look at the fact that 10% of our motorways are to remain so-called smart motorways. But does the government possibly leave itself open for legal challenge? And I'll be joined down the line by the trainer of Hill 16, the horse that fell badly at the first at Aintree on Saturday and subsequently had to be put down. I will ask tonight, did animal rising directly cause the death of that horse? That and much more, but first, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is under investigation by Parliament's ethics watchdog over a possible failure to declare an interest. Downing Street says the inquiries over claims he failed to tell MPs his wife might benefit from a major measure announced in last month's budget. She holds shares in Koru Kids, a childcare agency likely to gain financially from a drive to recruit more childminders. Number 10 says the Prime Minister will clarify how it was declared as a ministerial interest rather than to the Commons. Meanwhile, Mr Sunak has accepted the UK doesn't have enough teachers to deliver on his ambition to improve children's numeracy skills. He says an anti-maths mindset is costing the UK economy tens of billions of pounds every year and wants to ensure the subject is studied by all students in England up to the age of 18.
The UK is one of the least numeric countries in the developed world. More than 8 million adults have numeracy skills below those expected of a 9-year-old. And around a third of our young people don't pass maths GCSE. We make jokes about not being able to do maths. It's socially acceptable. We say things like, oh, maths, I can't do that, it's not for me, and everyone laughs. But we'd never make a joke like that about not being able to read.
NHS England has said nearly 200,000 hospital appointments and procedures had to be rescheduled due to the strike by junior doctors this month. It includes people who were waiting for operations and other treatments, as well as scans and follow-up appointments. Tens of thousands of workers staged a 96-hour strike in a dispute over pay between April 11th and 15th. It comes as the Prime Minister admitted it'll be a challenge to cut NHS waiting times because of industrial action, while also adding that he remains hopeful wait times can ultimately be cut. More than 5,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats this year. GB News can reveal around 120 people have arrived today, with 3 small boats intercepted by UK authorities. It's after a surge in small boat crossings as criminal people smuggling gangs take advantage of better weather conditions. A French court has cleared European plane maker Airbus and Air France of involuntary manslaughter, nearly 14 years after a plane travelling from Brazil to France crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. The trial was France's first ever for corporate manslaughter, with both firms pleading not guilty. It found several acts of negligence by both companies, but that wasn't enough for full liability for the crash. 228 people lost their lives on the flight travelling from Rio de Janeiro to Paris in June 2009. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. You're with GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Talk about out of touch. Well, of course, he was the head boy at Winchester. He went on to do incredibly well at university, and he is an academic. And I think completely out of touch with the fact that millions of young people loathe the very word maths. It just turns them off immediately. So the idea they should all do maths until the age of 18, I think, is frankly bonkers. After all, if they're not doing very well at maths at 16, what on earth makes you think they'll be any better at it by the age of 18? No, it'll lead to mass truancy, in my opinion. Now, when he talked about the fact that people need life skills after school, and that if you're not numerate, you're at a disadvantage, well, I agree with him there. Absolutely. And I think learning the basics, being numerate, I think those things are very important. When he talked about mortgages and interest rates and all of that, well, though that could be taught as life skills at school, just get the word maths out of it, because people think immediately of quadratic equations or pi or wherever else it may be, and they're never going to use that stuff in the whole of their lives. I think a lot more vocational training actually might be a better idea for 16 to 18s than going on doing maths. So I think the Prime Minister is hopelessly, completely out of touch on this issue. Well, tell me what you think. You know, tell me, is it a good idea? Let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. Now, I'm joined by Lord Kenneth Baker, former Education Secretary, and something of a reformer, because in your time some big things happened. Yeah. The introduction of the national curriculum, and of course the merging of the old O-level and CSE into
absolutely right.
the GCSE.
All of that.
And as a reformer you had quite some battles with the unions, yes. I remember, and getting change of any kind is difficult. Yeah. What is Rishi Sunak trying to do here?
I think what Rishi Sunak should be doing is talk about number, not maths.
Children should be leaving school who are numerate, understand number, otherwise there's a disadvantage. Now, in the schools I'm promoting, university technical colleges, some youngsters want to do A-level maths because they're going on to that at university or engineering.
Which is fine.
But most don't. We have core maths, which is half the level of an A-level. And this deals with a number. It makes it practical, because children at 18 must be numerate. Now, you, I think, worked as a dealer in some message.
Yeah.
Now, you knew about numbers, you knew about margins, you knew about profits, you knew what the figures were. Now, children ought to leave like that, knowing about number. So that, in fact, I did, as you mentioned, quadratic equations and simultaneous equations for the predecessor of the GCSEs called the School Certificate 600 years ago. And I've never used them since. And when it came to trigonometry, you know, a circle, you had to learn that the diameter of a circle, if you multiplied it by the irrational number 3.11 pi, gave you the the circumference. Lovely thing to know. I've never used it in my life.
No.
I've never had to use it. But I have had to know about margins. I was a businessman. I had to know what the margin was of profit. If, for example, you're a greengrocer and you buy 5 bananas for £1 and your accountant tells you you've got to get 50% profit, what do you charge for your bananas?
So we're not talking here about mathematics, Kenneth Bacon.
No.
We're talking here about life skills.
You're talking about total life skills, and that is what my schools give to youngsters at 18 when they leave.
Now, you've got a series of free schools that you're in charge of.
They're free schools, 44,
yes.
20,000 students, and we give them vocational training and skills training. And they are going into a numbered world. Whatever they're going to do, they're going to use numbers. And they've got to understand margins and percentages, just as you did as a trader. When you were trading on the metal exchanges, you had to know your margins and your percentages, didn't you?
If you didn't,
by heart.
Well, you wouldn't last all that long otherwise.
I mean, so you didn't have to do equations. You're not an equation man, you're a results man.
No. That's absolutely true for me. But when you talk about the schools that you're involved with, and you talk about vocational training, practical training that people can use afterwards, I don't hear that being talked about in Westminster at all.
That's the trouble.
It's as if the Blair doctrine, which the Conservative Party went along with, that we had to up the number of people that went to university almost for the sake of it.
Yeah, I agree.
At the expense. I mean, I know people in the engineering sectors, for example, and look at nursing, where we literally have to import from abroad.
Correct. All of that. Now, look, in my schools, 25% of our students become apprentices. 25% become apprentices. 50% go to university to do STEM subjects, only STEM subjects, practical subjects. The rest get local jobs. So as a result, we have some of the most successful schools in the country. We train them for the job market. And that's what is missing from the schools today. The academic curriculum that was imposed by Gove is far too academic, 8 academic subjects. Nothing practical is taught. We don't actually teach our children data skills at school. And data skills are absolutely necessary in this A1 world, artificial intelligence world. You've got to understand as well.
The Prime Minister talked about changing the culture. You know, he says that, that no one's embarrassed to say they're bad at maths, and it's this big drive for maths. But actually, the cultural change that's needed is the one that you talked about a few moments ago. The cultural change is that rather than people getting their GCSEs, their A-levels and their degrees in social sciences and all that, having a jolly good 3 years, I'm sure, that actually the cultural change that is needed is in Westminster to understand the importance of these life skills. How do we get there?
Well, look, we have a chance in the next election. Each party is now going to think what it's going to say in its manifesto in 18 months' time. And I'm trying to persuade the Conservative Party to be really radical. They've got to abandon the academic curriculum in our schools, and they've got to bring back data instruction and practical studies. In my colleges, 14-year-olds take 2 days a week making and designing things with their hands in workshops and in laboratories, or they go and visit companies. That's why they get jobs. They're working for jobs. And we deal with lots of disadvantaged children. And we also do with some really bright children. And that's what has to happen to our education. Now, look, this is a major task for whoever wins the next election, to change technical education dramatically. It's needed in our country desperately. And so I'm pressing very hard that the Tories should be radical.
Do you think by doing what you're doing, that you're making school more interesting, more relevant, more exciting?
Yes. We don't get absenteeism. We take in some difficult children at Fortune who are totally fed up with education, utterly fed up with education. But by using their hands, taking things, they use tools for the first time in their lives. They measure things accurately, metal accurately, or plastic accurately, or wood accurately. They use machinery. It changes their attitude. We don't have disruption in our schools. We hardly ever expel a member. We only expel a member if they've actually hit a teacher. Otherwise, we cope with them, we change their attitudes.
Well, I'm going to come and visit.
Please, come and visit one.
No, I'm going to come with GB News and visit one of these schools and see how you do it.
Okay.
Because I think what you're saying, I find it actually quite inspiring.
Yes.
And very... Kenneth Baker, thank you very much indeed
Nice
for coming
to be
in.
with you.
and
One thing I
sharing
should
that.
say, I went during the war, evacuated to Southport to a primary school, Ordinary Church of England primary school in a working class area, and we learnt our times tables by chanting aloud. 1, 3 is 3, 2 3s are 6, 3 3s are 9, 6 6s are this, 9 9s are
82.
81.
81, sorry. Yeah, close.
That's why you're coming to my college.
I better come back. Kenneth Baker, thank you. Only one big problem with Kenneth Baker, and it's a major problem with what he sets out as a vision for the future, and a really important vision for the future. I'm afraid, I think he's a bit too long in the tooth to get the job as Education Secretary. Unfortunate, that is, because I think we could do with what he's talking about. It's really, really important. Will Rishi Sunak listen? I don't think so. He seems to be absolutely hell-bent on this academic idea that everyone does mathematics until the age of 18. I think it really is a very, very big mistake. That said, in a moment, what we're going to talk about is something that threatens people's lives and is killing people. It's the introduction of smart motorways. We were expecting a major announcement over the last few days. What the government said, actually, is they won't build any more. But 10% of our motorways are currently smart motorways. I don't think they're very smart. We'll look at that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So why do we ever have smart motorways? Well, it's actually really rather simple, isn't it? The fact is there are more cars on the road because there are more people in the country. And when you think about it, our population has risen by 8 million since the year 2001. It means a lot more people are out there driving. I won't go into the reasons why the population has increased by 8 million. I think I've been through those many, many times before. And I don't want to distract from what I think is a very, very important subject. I've been deeply sceptical about these smart motorways myself. I've had a couple of breakdowns over the years on the hard shoulder of busy motorways. And let me tell you, even being on the hard shoulder of a motorway is frightening. Those guys that go out from the AA and RAC, I tell you what, they're brave people. It is, even on the hard shoulder, it's dangerous, let alone being broken down in a lane with a wall next to it and nowhere to go. The idea is terrible. My other objection is with so-called smart motorways, there seems to be a camera every couple of 100 yards. I mean, you don't look at the other cars on the road. You just literally stay glued to the speedometer as Big Brother watches every move you make. Now, we were expecting a big announcement from this government, and indeed this is a subject that Rishi Sunak talked about when he ran to be Conservative leader. What we got over the weekend, I think, was pretty pathetic. They tell us there'll be no new smart motorways. The 14 proposed projects will be shelved, but the existing smart motorways will remain. And so I have to ask myself, if it's not a good idea to extend the number of smart motorways, why is it a good idea to keep the existing ones? And the existing ones are unbelievably 10% of the motorway network in this country. Well, joining me, Mike Rawson, campaigner for Smart Motorways Kill, which indeed they do, don't they, Mike?
Sadly, the exact number is not known. We don't know how many people have suffered life-changing injuries, but we do know it's a lot. And what we also know, Nigel, is all those deaths were unnecessary. Because if the government wanted to widen the motorway, that's fine. Make it a 4-lane motorway, but put the hard shoulder back. But of course it was done to save money. And at the end of the day, lives, collateral damage, I suppose, to governments, but very sad for all those relatives and families left behind.
No, horrible. So they say they're shelving 14 proposed projects. Is that right, as far as you know?
It's hard to be certain. No, they are certainly carrying on with some of them. But what I find a bit strange, Nigel, the Prime Minister has said in public, smart motorways are unsafe.
And that's just a pause for a second there. So the Prime Minister has said smart motorways are unsafe, and yet has decided to retain 10% of our motorways as unsafe.
That's the way I see it. Now, how can you possibly continue building, finishing current constructions in the knowledge that what you're building is ultimately unsafe?
Well, they say there are no more constructions to happen, but I mean, that is a grey area. What is for certain, then, is that the 10% of our motorways that at this moment in time are smart motorways are to some degree unsafe. Yet the government has, I thought the government had a duty of care to us as people. Could this, Mike Rawson, in your opinion, could this potentially open the way for legal challenges?
I think it could. I think for the relatives of someone killed who will take on the government because that's what they're doing, and we've got to remember, Nigel, governments have got unlimited money They've got our taxpayers' money to fight any case that anybody brings against them. I don't know why they can't give people legal aid when people do want to take action against the government. But I think they do have a case to answer. I'm not a legal expert by any means.
But it does raise the question, doesn't it?
Indeed it does. The Prime Minister has said, he said it during the leadership campaign. I heard him say it. It was on the television. These motorways are unsafe, and he's admitted the public are uncomfortable with them. They don't like them. And vast majority of people do not want these motorways, and they want the government to reinstate the hard shoulder to all of the motorways, and that is this Smart Motorways Kill campaign.
Yep.
We'll carry on with Claire, who I pay tribute to because, you know, she lost her husband in the most violent accident, terrible accident, and she's campaigned relentlessly for 4 years despite all the emotion, the stress that she carries with her. So she's done really well.
What I never hear, Mike, I never hear the police talking about this. The police seem to be stum about this subject. Do you have any insights as to what the police think?
I don't, but what I would say is, in my view, and I think the view of Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, who produced a report a couple of years ago, the police service are not really interested in policing traffic. It's a very low profile. There are many commitments, and I acknowledge the huge demands. But, you know, more people die on the roads than ever from burglaries or any crime. And I don't seek to diminish these crimes, Nigel. Please don't think that. But the public do need to be policed sensibly and fairly. And marked police vehicles do influence drivers' behaviour. And if that results in less people being involved in collisions, being injured and at worst killed, then the police really ought to be putting more effort.
I suppose in one way, the installation of thousands of speed cameras all over the country kind of does the job for the police, but it takes away discretion.
You're absolutely right. When there are police officers who enforce the law, you can talk to motorists that you stop, and you can consider their driving, the time of day,
conditions,
whether it put anybody at risk, and you can have a sensible, common sense approach to policing, and I'm sure the public would actually welcome that rather than just getting fines and points from cameras.
Yeah, which now happens to drivers who've often driven for decades without ever incurring a penalty, financial penalty or points. Yeah, and folks, I've said it before on this programme, I'll say it again, it is 20 miles an hour on the embankment, 24 hours a day. It is crackers. But back to the very serious subject of smart motorways and of the campaign Smart Motorways Kill. Mike Rawson, thank you for joining me. A final thought on the government's announcement. How disappointed do you feel?
I am disappointed because I had hoped that the government would say, yes, no more smart motorways, and we are going to reinstate hard shoulders because we accept that's what the public want, and they represent us when all said and done, not dictate, but represent. And the money they're saving apparently is £1 billion from not converting these other schemes. Spend that £1 billion on reinstating hard shoulders between the bridges. That's what I asked for. I don't want them to destroy bridges and go to huge cost, but a programme of reinstating the hard shoulders, and when that happens, we can all go home.
Right. Well, good luck with the campaign. I'm behind you 100%. Now, this channel is very much a channel about free speech. We allow all sorts of different views, even ones we may disagree with very, very strongly. Last week, I had an organisation called Animal Rising on this programme. They said they were going to disrupt the Grand National. I said I was going to be there. In a moment, we'll tell you what happened, and we'll be joined by the trainer of Hill 16. We'll find out his fate and the role that Animal Rising played in it.
joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Britain.
Well, some of your thoughts on whether it's right that Rishi Sunak wants us all to stay on at school until we're 18 doing maths. Anthea says, just seems a bit ridiculous. We all have varying levels of ability. Some are good at maths, some aren't. If a natural ability attainment level for the subject isn't there by the age of 16, another 2 years will not change that substantially. Anthea, I absolutely agree with that. Another viewer says, absolutely not. Teach them how to use maths in real life or based on their planned career. And isn't this really the point that Kenneth Baker was making when he was in the studio earlier? And by the way, I thought his ideas about the skills that youngsters should leave schools with, I thought it was rather inspiring and very, very important indeed. Darren says, no, waste of money. Basic maths is sufficient for most people for most of the time. It's not maths, Darren, it's numbers. People need to be able to understand and use numbers, or at least have some idea of what numbers are. Now, last week, I did invite Nathan McGovern, who's the head of Animal Rising, an outfit I'd never heard from. They appear to be an offshoot of Just Stop Oil and no doubt Extinction Rebellion. But I did invite him in to the studio last week to talk about the upcoming Grand National. This is one of the things that Nathan McGovern said.
You haven't been at the National for a few years, but I assume you watched it in 2019.
Yeah, I've seen it, and I've seen it.
And you know, you saw the horse go over the first hurdle,
yeah,
and you saw how it fell and broke its neck. You saw it writhing in pain on the floor. And I can see in your eyes right now that you hated seeing that.
No, we don't like it, but we know they're the risks of a sport, and equally, of course, for the jockeys as well, many of whom get very, very seriously hurt. Well, I did go to the Grand National. We were very lucky with one thing. The weather was much better than it had been the previous 2 days. And I was in the centre of the parade ring with some of the owners, watching the horses going round ahead of the Grand National. And then something happened. Protesters started climbing fences and going onto the course. I noticed that as the horses went round repeatedly, that two or three of them got really, really hot, really sweaty, and were certainly getting pretty foamy at the mouth. They weren't looking happy with what went on. They then were rushed out. In the end, 12, 13 minutes late, there was a false start because another protester got on the course. I'm no expert when it comes to horses, but it seemed to me that general chaos and unnecessary level of stress caused by animal rising perhaps directly led to some of the things that happened in the first few minutes of the race. Well, joining me now is trainer Sandy Thompson, trainer of the horse Hill 16, who died at the Grand National. And Sandy joins me from Kelso. Sandy, good evening. Very sorry to see what happened at that first fence. Just tell us a little bit about Hill 16's history as a jumper.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. Hill 16, we bought Hill 16 2 years ago. He had looked like he was a nice young horse and hadn't progressed as he might have done. And on his second race for us, he was second, beating a nose over these Grand National fences in a chase called the Beecher Chase in November, which is over 3 miles. He had a great season last year. He was fourth and second in big races. The plan was always to run in the Grand National this year. He went back to Aintree in November again, and again jumped round well and finished really well. The ground wasn't quite soft enough for him, but he jumped really well and was sixth. And the plan then was to go to the Grand National, which duly happened on Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, so you're talking here about an experienced horse, a good jumping horse, a horse that hadn't fallen before. I mean, it looked as though, when the first fence came up, that Hill 16 almost didn't see the fence.
Well, he definitely saw it because he took off too far away from it, and landed on top of it. And that was the problem. And because he landed on top of it, his momentum, he sort of cartwheeled over it and unfortunately broke his neck and died instantly.
And let's be honest, without that protest, we would have had the parade ring, there would have been the walk up on the course, there would have been a start. I mean, you believe that what happened ahead of that race directly contributed to the death of that great horse?
I do, and the other statistic to sort of support my view is that 9 years ago the course was changed hugely. The fences were changed completely, smaller, the ditches were taken out, the drops were taken out. And in those 9 years, there have been on average, less than 2 horses a year have fallen or been unseated at the first or second fence. This year, there was 8 horses. And you know that just shows, and going along with from people I've spoken to, that they felt there is no doubt that these horses and jockeys and officials, were just put under so much pressure by these so-called animal welfare, whatever you like to call them, advocates or whatever, animal rising, that this was the outcome. They will obviously deny it and say, a horse would have died. But, since the last 9 years, there have been far fewer fatalities. Listen, we don't want any fatalities. That is the plan. And everybody is working very hard to reduce the numbers. But unfortunately, we will never reduce them completely.
No, that's right. But those numbers are pretty conclusive, aren't they, as you say? 2 a year on average, unseated or falling at the first 2, 8 this year. No, those numbers, I think, are pretty comprehensive. I think it's quite easy to say that animal rising directly contributed towards animal cruelty and death, the very opposite of what they said they would do. One thing I will say, Sandy, I thought the Merseyside police acted swiftly. They did a really, I mean, compared to, you know, here down south when people climb up onto gantries on the M25 or glue themselves to roads for hours, I thought the Merseyside police did a very, very good job of keeping that delay as limited as it was. But let me ask you, what does the sport do from here?
The sport continually is looking at itself to see, you know, how it can improve things. There will obviously be a review. There will be a number of options looked at. You know, it may be that they decide, if they look back and see number 36 to 40, have those horses been in the finish in recent years? And if they find that these horses are not getting near to winning a race, you know, perhaps it will be decided that they'll cut the numbers. They may also look at the start. The other problem, it's been a problem all their life, is trying to deal with loose horses. But obviously, when you lose eight horses at the first two fences, you suddenly have a lot more horses running loose. It's also been suggested that the jockeys
absolutely. No, absolutely. But I get that totally. But I mean, surely, you know, all this talk of, you know, reducing the size perhaps of the field, of reducing the fences even more, I mean, that just makes horses go faster, and accidents are some form of accident will always happen. I mean, isn't there a danger that the horse racing industry goes into appeasement mode and goes too far the other way?
No, the number of the size of the fences is not going to change, because if you make them any smaller, the horses will just go faster. So that is not going to change. Obviously, the number of horses is a difficult one. Nobody can tell you the answer. You know, will it just mean that it, you know, the horses at the back will just bunch up more, so there won't actually be any more room? We simply don't know the answer to that. But obviously, we're just continually looking at things. I'm not saying these are going to happen, but these are some of the things that they might they might look at. They look at things every year. They're always in the British Horse Racing Association is always in contact with the RSPCA and horse welfare, World Horse Welfare, and discussing, you know, how we can make our sport safer. I mean, obviously, there's been huge controversy over the whip. You know, last year's winner actually would have been disqualified this year because the whip rules have changed. They've been changed hugely, and you know, if you strike a horse over 7 times, you know, you will be fined. If you go over 10, you'll be disqualified. So these are things that already we've taken on board, and we're always looking to see how we can improve things further.
Well, I have to say, Sandy Thompson, thank you for coming on and joining me, and I think you've given a very, very reasoned response to the animal rising guest I had on last week. I'm very sorry for what happened and wish you well. Thank you. Well, I think we can say with absolute confidence that Animal Rising have turned out to be complete and utter morons. They have caused the very opposite of what they set out to do. They are but a small minority. They appear to be, frankly, professional protesters. They're turning up for Just Stop Oil, they're turning up at the National, they're turning up with Extinction Rebellion. Goodness knows who funds them and pays them. I don't know the answer to that. And they're threatening over the course of the rest of this year to disrupt greyhound racing and, indeed, the Epsom Derby. Well, I hope all police forces start to act more robustly. Well done, Merseyside Police. In a moment, we'll look again at China. We talked about it at length last week, about the huge diplomatic deals that China is striking around the rest of the world. What we'll discuss in a moment are the direct threats and intimidation they're posing to British members of Parliament. This all coming from the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A few moments ago, I described these full-time protesters as morons. Perhaps you think I used a word that was far too strong. I suspect it should have been stronger because just a few moments ago in Sheffield, where we're in the first round of the World Snooker Championship, a match between Rob Milkins and Joe Perry, first round match was taking place, and this is what happened.
Joe Perry, 4.
Well, I don't quite know what that was for. Terrible scenes here at the Crucible.
Well, for those listening to this on their car radio or in the kitchen, a Just Stop Oil protester jumped on the snooker table and unleashed a wave of orange-type powder, goodness knows what the substance was, in order to stop the game. And I'm told that at an adjacent table, another protester tried. In fact, you can see on the right-hand side of the picture, a woman, I think, tried to do the same, and the referee manhandled her out of the way. These people will stop at absolutely nothing to stop all normal life from going ahead. And we've got to think very hard how we deal with this. Are we going to allow this small, slightly crazed minority, we're going to allow them to disrupt every aspect of our national life and sporting life? I don't think we can afford to. I think we're going to have to get much, much tougher. In some cases, I can't blame them, really. You see, they've been told from primary school all the way through that because of people driving 4x4s in Chelsea, the world is about to end. We have spread among some of these young people climate hysteria without any sense of balance whatsoever. Now, back to China, a really, really important subject. I'm joined down the line by Tim Loughton, Conservative Member of Parliament, on the back of what I think is a really, really disturbing story. You see, when the Chinese government put sanctions on politicians, they don't just put them on the elected MPs themselves, or MEPs in the case of a few in the European Parliament. They apply it to the whole of their families. And a story has come out over the weekend that the child of an MP applied to go to a leading college at a leading British university. But unfortunately, that wouldn't work, because if that child was allowed, the Chinese commercial, so-called commercial company, would stop funding the college. Tim Loughton, what on earth is going on here?
Good evening, Nigel. This is some of the intimidation tactics, I'm afraid, the Chinese Communist government use when politicians like me, stand up and call them out for their industrial-scale human rights abuses in Xinjiang, for the way that they've intimidated and killed over 1 million Tibetans in the invasion back in 1959, and what they're doing in Hong Kong. Fortunately, many of us have been using platforms in Parliament around the world to call this out, and the Chinese don't like it, which is why 5 MPs, including me, and 2 of the Lords, were sanctioned 2 years ago. We hold that a badge of honor. They don't stop there. Right? The tentacles of the Chinese Communist government extend throughout the world, and they will really stop short of nothing to get their way.
Yeah, I mean, being an elected politician, Tim, you know, I did 20 years in the European Parliament, and, you know, we stand up and we fight for issues we believe in, and we get it. We know we're going to get the Twitter bots attacking us and all the rest of it. I know in Ian Duncan Smith's case, actually impersonations on email of him. But when it comes to our children, who very often may have completely different political views to us, when it comes to them being targeted, I can't think of any direct precedent to this.
Well, it's part of the intimidation tactics. I mean, the 5 MPs, Ian Duncan Smith, Nusrat Ghani, me, Tom Tugendhat, and Neil, our minister, none of us actually received an official letter from the Chinese government saying, you are sanctioned, as is your family, you cannot do this. All we know, there was a press conference announcing that we 5 wicked people for spreading lies have been sanctioned. And so all our assets in China are being seized. I don't think any have any. All our business connections with China are being stopped. Again, we don't have any. And we can't travel to China or can our close relatives. It doesn't say what the close relatives are, and I've no great way to go to China anyway. But we're not the important ones. It's those people who don't have a platform. Those people who escaped from Hong Kong, escaped from Xinjiang, the Uyghur community in the UK, around the world, Tibetans who've been escaping Tibet since 1959. It's a campaign of intimidation, and we hear stories day in about Uyghurs who receive messages saying that their families who are still in China will be in danger if they don't comply, if they stop talking out against human rights abuses or whatever. And this is very intimidating, and this is pretty scary. If you are escaping what's going on in China, you can never quite escape the tentacles of the Chinese government. I'm afraid they have huge influence all around the world, including on university campuses, which is why the story about one of my colleagues' children potentially not getting to university, because some universities rely for something like 30% of their income from Chinese students. And there's a lot of investment by Chinese companies in research projects on Chinese campuses. This is not healthy and shouldn't be such a reliance on Chinese money.
No, absolutely. Tim Loughton, thank you for joining us and sharing your story on this and that of others. And I have to say, the whole thing is absolutely horrible. It is awful. But at the same time, we learned today that Saudi Arabia and Iran will, in the next couple of months, actually have a summit in Tehran. All of this because of that rapprochement that was brokered by President Xi just a few weeks ago. And this is a story that I've been coming back to again and again, because diplomatically, China is on the march. And all the while they're doing that, Joe Biden is in the west of Ireland, telling the world with his English surname just how Irish he is. And President Macron of France, well, he's busy, of course, going over to Beijing appealing the Chinese Communist Party and telling them, do what you like with Taiwan, frankly, we don't care. It's extraordinary. Time for a couple of Barrage the Farages. The first is from Treasure.
Hi, Nigel Farage. I'm Treasure from London. When are you going to start paying the doctors what they deserve?
Well, Treasure, that was said with great passion. Yes, I know. Now, as you well know, Treasure, once doctors are fully qualified, they have the option to work within the National Health Service and do plenty of private work in their free time, and they can earn a huge amount of money. GPs, I mean, under the deal that Blair gave them, have effectively been running businesses. I know that junior doctors often work very, very long hours, but they are not that badly paid once they've been junior doctors for a few years, and they are, after all, doing an apprenticeship for an extremely well-paid job. I don't want to sound unsympathetic, but frankly, I think the way that some of the junior doctors are behaving, the way the Royal College of Nursing are behaving, is actually going to make the public begin to doubt those that work within the National Health Service. And that is not a good or a healthy thing. I've got time for one more. VJ has a Barrage the Farage for me.
Hello, Nigel. It was great to meet you at CPAC in US. My question for you today is, what is the government going to do about the channel crossings? We have loads and loads of illegal immigrants coming through the boats, and it doesn't seem to end.
Well, VJ, delighted to meet you at CPAC, and I have to say CPAC is just the most mega event that takes place just outside DC, and there's a summer one in August in Dallas, which I will be at as well. What are the government going to do to stop the boats? Absolutely nothing, VJ. Nothing. Make lots of noise, get the Tory papers say, jolly good, isn't it absolutely marvellous? And you'll notice on Friday a distinct change of tone from Rishi Sunak as he begins to realise there's a big High Court case starting next Monday, and that may well go on to the Court of Appeal, it may well go on to Strasbourg. All the while we're tied to the ECHR. We will not solve this problem. How many times do I have to say it? You know what? I've been on this for over 3 years. I've not been proved wrong yet. Oh, and by the way, with the boats that crossed this morning, we're now through 5,000 for the year. That may not sound like a big number, but the weather's been generally pretty horrid. By about the end of June, we will be completely and utterly overwhelmed. We'll need a couple of big new barges every single day. Hope that's clear enough, VJ. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, what have you got this evening?
What have we got this evening? Well, I'll be following on a bit from you because we're having somebody who supports the protest at the Grand National, and I look forward to discussing with him the consequences, because you've just had the train of Hill 16 on, and what happens when you frighten horses that are, particularly racehorses, highly strung animals. We're also going to be talking about this extraordinary St George's Day message we're going to get when the state suddenly blasts in our ear at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And see what people think of that.
I've had enough of Big Brother, I got to tell you. And Jacob, I have to say, you know, conclusive figures, aren't they? 17 fallers in 9 years at the first 2 races, 8 this year. Unbelievable. Yes. Let's have a look at this vastly improved spring weather, shall we?
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Probably a cloudy start for many of us tomorrow morning, but it's expected to turn sunnier. There will be a fairly brisk easterly breeze, making it feel quite chilly on North Sea coasts. High pressure is responsible for that, also bringing many of us dry weather for much of this week. 1 or 2 light showers here and there with some thick cloud in places this evening, but they're tending to fade away. I think we'll see the cloud increasing once more across the east, and that will spread west as we go through the night. But still some good breaks in the cloud across parts of West Wales, northwest England. That will allow it to turn a little chilly. A pocket or 2 of frost isn't out of the question in rural spots. Most towns and cities, though, start Tuesday at 5 or 6. Most of us will start with a lot of cloud, but I think that cloud will tend to melt away over parts of central and eastern England, clearing from western areas too. It may linger on some of the coasts across eastern Scotland into the afternoon, but for many it will turn sunny before the cloud increases again across the southeast during the afternoon. With that easterly breeze feeling quite fresh on those North Sea coasts, but in the sunshine further west quite pleasant. We could get close to 20 Celsius over the Highlands once more. During the evening, the cloud will thicken up a little bit more over England and Wales, with the possibility of a few showers coming into southwest England as we head into Wednesday morning, and they'll still be around perhaps through the day here. Perhaps parts of South Wales may also catch a shower, but for most places, again, it's dry and fine on Wednesday, often fairly cloudy over the Midlands and southern England, but some good spells of sunshine elsewhere. Still that easterly wind bringing a chill to eastern coasts, but further west, temperatures getting into the mid-teens. But overall, it is turning cooler, and that will continue as we go through this week. High pressure still dominating to the north, but increasingly we'll see weather fronts coming in from the east later this week to bring showers and a chillier feel. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evening.